Hey guys, thanks for joining me here in this episode of what we're doing this week in class. Um, so this week we're gonna be diving into renewable energy as a solution to climate change. One of many things we need to think about is reducing energy demand. Now you guys are eventually going to design a system for your own house, but before you do that, I want you to think smaller. I want you to think about designing something a little more mobile, a little more distributed, a little bit more. I don't know. Uh, little bit more self-designed in a way, just to dip your little toe in the water, so to speak. And I'm going to base this on some of the experience that I had several years ago in Kenya personally, and then also, of course, um, this is all based on my. It's inspired by the school that myself and Mrs. Kloos and others still work with on the board. We raise money for it's Nasaruni Academy in Narok, Kenya. Um, on the presentation here, you'll see we're going to highlight something called the UN Millennium Development Goal number 7, which focuses on access to affordable and clean energy. And in places where development really hasn't taken off yet, not we've got plenty of renewable energy going in here, and we need more of it here in the United States and in the other portions of the West and so forth. But places like Africa, and many places in Africa, where they're still relying on traditional means of producing energy, such as charcoal production, charcoal burning, and so forth, for heat, for cooking, where there's no electricity available, for instance. It's very difficult to you know to live. They can live. The people can live, but it's very difficult to interact with modern life. Okay, and it's expensive. And so, how do we make this? How do we make the transition to this energy future more equitable and so forth? Now, I'm going to preface this whole presentation by saying that this is meant to inspire you to think about these things, but not inspire you to go out and save the world, so to speak. Okay, because to be honest with you, there's folks doing this stuff in Kenya. They don't really need our expertise and help. They could use resources, and that's probably the biggest thing is just raising money. But anyway, so let's just look at this. Here's a Maasai man. Maasai are a tribal group within Kenya that lives in the southern part of Kenya. Most of the Kenyans I know are from the Maasai people, and he's putting a solar panel on top of the house, and just getting ready to maybe perhaps charge a phone or something like that. All right, so Millennium Development Goal number 7. The focus of it is really to integrate the principles of sustainable development in every nation's policies and programs and so forth, and to reduce the depletion of environmental resources, especially from other countries coming into countries and sort of colonizing their resources. We've been doing that for a while. The U.S. has done a lot of that, especially in the Middle East. China is doing a lot of that now, among others. And so, you come into a country, you extract its resources, and then you go on, right? And then that country doesn't really have a chance to sort of pick itself up because all those resources were then taken off elsewhere. And then there's the environmental destruction that goes with that. So, okay, so there's 4 things here in total. I can encourage you to pause this and take a look at them. But really, what I wanted to show you, and there's an interactive version of this embedded in the Schoology page. But I want you to look at this diagram here for a moment and think about where the U.S. and Canada are in terms of annual per capita electricity use. This is in kilowatt hours. You guys know something about that now with your electric bills. And you guys fit in with probably around the median of most Americans. You're somewhere in here. But if you look at other places and you look at the Human Development Index, which is an index developed by, I believe it's the World Bank actually. But anyway, this is based on a number of different factors. But you can see as that goes up, so does electricity usage. So as you get greater development, you get more electricity demand. And that makes sense, but here's a quantified version of it, right? So we can get a look at how that actually plays out. Electricity transmission and production transmission isn't a simple thing, though. We have a system where we have a centralized grid system, except for Texas, of course, but even they have a centralized Texas grid, right? Well, we produce power centrally, and then we transmit it great distances, and that's a gift of Thomas Edison. Um, And it's what we call the alternating. It's the result of alternating current as opposed to using direct current, AC versus DC, not the band. And so, of course, when we're thinking about solar generation, we're thinking about DC. When we're thinking about wind turbines, we're thinking about DC. We have to convert those to AC, or actually, rather, invert those to AC power to be able to run any of our appliances, because that's how they're designed to run. The advantage of AC is that you can transmit it over long distances without having to have really thick wires with high amperages. And I'm not going to get into the physics of all of that, but basically, you have a power plant that generates a ton of electricity. You have transformers that step up the voltage for transmission, and then the neighborhood transformer steps down the voltage for transmission to homes, back down to 200 amps or whatever. And this is important because you'll see substations all over the place, and that's what's going on at these substations in part. So yeah, we're not talking about the band. So in a DC system, you're generating the power and you're taking it straight to the home. The trouble is that you have to keep the amperage kind of low, and it's more difficult to transmit it over great distance without a lot of voltage loss. And AC runs a little differently. We can do the transmission over great distances. And this little battle between AC and DC actually goes back to the late 19th century between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. And so these are the reality is that we ended up with a distributed power grid because of how that all resulted. So today's electricity is very centralized. Knock out a single power plant, you knock out a whole lot of homes. Tomorrow's grid may be a little different. You may have a centralized grid with a bunch of, and actually already is, as I have a grid. I have a solar system at home, and I'm a part of a distributed grid then, as is the Triplet Tech here, MRGS. We've got the solar array out back. And then you got solar plant going on over on Turkey Knob Road. And these are, if you go over into West Virginia, you've got in Pennsylvania, you've got wind turbines like crazy all over the place. This is examples of these things happening. All right, little bit of background here. So Kenya is located on the East African Rift. This country right here, every little red triangle is a volcano. There's a lot of geothermal potential in Kenya, actually, and anywhere along the East African Rift, because the magma is relatively shallow. Africa's ripping apart here. It's also ripping apart at the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. And so a lot of the stuff you know about from the Red Sea on up in through Israel and so forth is all the result of tectonic activity. So you get this linear seas like this, and then the Red Sea, and then the Dead Sea, and so forth. Anyway, there's a lot of volcanic potential. It's also very sunny, a lot of sun. This is looking at direct normal irradiation. You guys know something about this because you figured out about 4.4 to 4.8 for your sun hours during the day. Well, you can see the sun hours. This is in kilowatt hours per square meter. It's actually much greater in Kenya than it is anywhere around here. So the solar potential is really good in Kenya. On top of that, you're on the equator, so solar panels can face directly upward without too much work there. So what we're really looking for in a situation where solar works out well is where we have more surplus than we have deficit in terms of incoming versus outgoing radiation. And that's going to be really important for us to think about. We're not going to use this particular diagram, but we want to have a surplus of energy that we can capture through the incoming radiation. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with the solar panels, is to capture this energy here. So in East Africa, this is the rift zone from the highway that you drive on from Nairobi to Narok. And you look down into the Rift Valley. This is where the Earth is splitting apart. Africa is splitting into two. There's a vision of one of the volcanic mountains in the valley. So yep, that's a volcano. And this is a picture of some Maasai girls near a village that I visited. I took this picture, and you can get a sense of what the landscape looks like around Narok. This was in January. Of course, they don't have the same kinds of seasons we do. They have wet and dry, and so it was plenty warm. I mean, we were in short sleeves and so forth. By the way, Mrs. Kloos was on this trip also. That was a giraffe that was right there. All right, this is us in a village, and we're visiting a village with Alisayo. She's the one that got the school started. This is David. He used to be the security guard at the school. But this is his village, and so this is what we call a boma, which is inside the Manyata, which is the village complex. And we were bringing cookies and food to these folks here. This is the inside of a boma. And these are some simple benches that people have to sit on. The boma is made from sticks of wood. The bed here is just pieces of cowhide stitched together. The cattle are very important in Maasai culture. It's their primary pastoral duty is to take care of cattle. It's also the currency in that culture is to the more cows you have, the wealthier you are. And they do really beautiful beadwork, as you've probably already noticed. But you can see it's a very simple place. And here's some vessels they use for various things. They collected a lot of it. Sometimes it's just materials they collect from. Um, uh, they keep around for a long time and reuse a lot of. This is a sleeping area over here that David's showing us. And then below here is the cooking area, and you can see some areas where they have storage for some cooking utensils of various sort. This is actually cooking oil here. You see these jugs all over the place. And as far as light, the only light coming in here is just these little tiny windows, and they're tiny because there's a lot of wild animals, lions, leopards, snakes, and you're trying to protect yourself from those things. Notice the poles here, right below the stove pit, are charred, and that's because you're burning charcoal to do all your cooking, and all the cooking is done inside of the boma. So you can imagine some things that are dealing with here. They're dealing with, of course, there's no heating or cooling except for whatever fire you have. It's very smoky because you don't have much in the way of draft. It's just that little hole, and it's very dark. There's very little lighting. You can imagine if you're fortunate enough to go to school. When you come home from school and have to, to continue your homework or whatever, you have no light. So how do you produce? How do you do any of your schoolwork after dark? It's very difficult. You can see what the ceiling looks like in the boma. It's charred, heavily charred, and that's all from the charcoal smoke. Taking a look inside the boma, you can see it's pretty heavily charred inside of there as well. Sometimes in some bomas, they even bring some of the goats inside just to protect them from wild animals. Just another place, the little window here in the side. These are made from sticks and mud, primarily with sticks, mud, and dung. I should say there's also cow dung used to help produce the walls. This is a picture of what some of them look like. This is one of our former students here. This is a typical boma. There's some firewood that's been cut. This is a typical watering, place to obtain water, surface water. And you can imagine this is also where animals are drinking and bathing and so forth. And so the water is an issue. And so, by the way, I'm pointing these things out because these are the things I want you to think about. How do you address these issues with some renewable energy products? When you have there's no electricity, you're not seeing any electrical transmission lines out here, right? There's no electricity out here, none. And the only way you're getting it is either through solar and batteries or some other form. Wind does get a bit windy. There's lots of course, livestock around here. There's some dust devils, so you can see there's definitely some wind potential. Lots of flat areas here. Here's a Maasai cow, typical Maasai cow, and Maasai men herding cattle. This is over on Mount Suswa, which is a volcano not too far away from that location that we visited. This is the crater of Mount Suswa, and then this is us inside. That's actually Mr. Kloos, us inside of a lava tube inside of the volcano, which is really cool. This here is a really imaginative invention that we came across as we were driving by. These are pipes coming out of the ground, and there's magma has a lot of water in it actually, and these are in the ground in a very hydrothermally active place. This is on the slopes of Mount Suswa, and the water comes, condenses in these pipes and then drains down in, and they put a dish down over here to collect it. Anyway, that's where we're going to end this. And so the point of all of this was, and you can go back through the version of the link I've given you for this, but I want you to think about some solutions. What are some ways, if you are living in this environment, what are some things you might want to have designed, that you could use? What I want you all to think about is what are some of the challenges, whether it be water quality and water extraction and treatment, electricity, production, lighting, cooking. What are some things that you could think about coming up with an engineer a solution for that would be low impact on the environment, but yet really improve some aspect of life within a Masai Manyata? Okay, we're not going to go there and do this sort of thing. We're just sort of brainstorming and dreaming a bit. So you're going to be thinking about a few things, the parameters in particular, the design constraints. You'll need to define those, and then you'll need to be thinking about how much power do I need, all of that good stuff. We'll talk about all this a little bit in class on Monday and Wednesday, but I want you to think about it during the week. This is largely going to be done on your own, or at least outside of class, because we build wind turbines in class. So I'm going to ask you guys to group up for this. Okay. All right. Take care, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.